All right, welcome everyone to today's CreditorWatch webinar. We'll be looking at some market insights from Q1 2017. So my name's Patrick. I'm the Commercial Director at CreditorWatch. I'm fairly involved in putting together some of these statistics for our small business risk review that we release on a quarterly basis. And I'm very much across the product and sales and marketing of CreditorWatch as well. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like. So before we get started, just a couple of things. Question and answer. Usually we say during our webinars, please, ask questions along the way and we'll answer them. This time round, please ask questions along the way. However, we will try to fit in some answers, hopefully towards the end of the webinar itself. I know that when it comes to, market information, insights, statistics, it can get a little bit technical sometimes and people can ask fairly complicated questions. We want to make sure that we answer them the right way for you. So if we don't manage to get a chance to answer questions at the end, rest assured that we will get back to you in time. We've got your details, so we'll shoot you an email with a response to any questions that you have. But as I said, feel free to ask questions along the way as they come to you. As always, the slides and a recording of this webinar will be sent to you in the next sort of 24 to 48 hours. So if you have to duck off early or you want to revisit it in the future or pass it on to a colleague, you'll be able to do that. So our agenda for today, I'll quickly touch on who CreditorWatch is. The majority of you would be well aware, being regular attendees of our webinars and or customers as well. I'll talk a little bit more about what our small business risk review is that we release on that quarterly basis. And then I'll get into the results of that risk review as well. And we'll have a look at some stats, some graphs, some insights, and potentially a little bit of commentary around those as well. And I'll have a little poll for you at the end just to see, hopefully that you're getting some value out of these risk reviews that we do send out. So just quickly about CreditorWatch, we're Australia's leading commercial credit reporting bureau, and we've just ticked over 50,000 customers recently. And they're really made up of customers all the way from, sole traders operating out of, their second bedroom or their living room through to ASX listed entities as well. So I think we've got last count was about 80 of the ASX 200 using us as well. We've got a wide variety of products, including obviously the basis and foundations of CreditorWatch, which is the credit reports, the ability to receive alerts and monitor your debtors, and also debt collection tools. We've really had a big push recently on our online credit application and our automated decisioning tools. And that's something, again, it can be used by people who are bringing on, only a couple of new customers a month, all the way through to, larger organizations who are bringing on hundreds, if not thousands of new customers a month. And that online credit application can be, fairly basic. It's just an online form where we replicate your current credit application all the way through to an integrated, customized offering that can plug into your ERP system or into Salesforce, etc. For small businesses, we're very much a virtual accounts receivable manager. We actually have a survey coming up in the next couple of weeks that we'll be looking at and asking people, how many dedicated full-time employees do you have in that accounts receivable role? I think we'll get some fairly good insights as to how big and how small some of the companies are that use CreditorWatch. So a little bit about the small business risk review. The risk review is a quarterly analysis of aggregated data and also trade payment information. So like CreditorWatch, when we put together this risk review, we're relying on a spread of data coming from multiple sources. And really the aim is to provide a nice summary for you, your colleagues, all of our customers and supporters and partners, even some of our suppliers, sign up to receive this. Is just to supply them with some key insights, trends, give them a better understanding of what we're seeing in the market, rather than just what we read about in the papers and whatnot. So it's a fairly unique offering. There's plenty of other organisations that offer similar sort of reviews or reports. However, having a significant number of small businesses that use us, we do get that unique insight into what small businesses are feeling out there, how they're paying, and also how they're being paid. So some of the data sources that we're pulling that information from include ASIC and the Australian Business Register, courts around Australia, and also the Insolvency Notices Register, which is run by ASIC. We've got over 100 debt collectors that use us for their own search requirements, and when they perform a search on the debtor, they have the ability to leave what we call a mercantile footprint or a mercantile inquiry. And then, of course, our 50,000 plus customers, small businesses up to ASX listed entities, they're providing payment defaults, trade payment information, and obviously we can see how many customers they're monitoring or looking up on a regular basis, which helps paint a bit more of a picture. So when we provide this this deck, this PowerPoint presentation, you'll be able to click on obviously this link here, download Q1 2017 risk review. The majority of you, if you're on our mailing list, would have received an email with this already, but if not, feel free to click on there and download the PDF, nice colorful infographic that we have, which I'll give you a quick look at. So as you can see, gives you a fairly good understanding of what I will be talking about today. I might come back to this in a little bit. So the one thing I want you to keep in mind through this presentation today is what we're calling a bad debts journey. What we're finding is, typically you'll see an invoice that's issued, becomes outstanding, overdue. Hopefully you're registering a default. If it's large enough, you're most likely taking court action, and from there, again, winding up a company, and then the company goes into administration. So that's a fairly simplistic view of, how a typical bad debt should travel from being an issued invoice through to, if it's big enough, court action, winding up an administration. So just keep this in mind as we go along. The reason I say that is what we're seeing more and more is defaults that are registered with CreditorWatch are typically turning into court actions within 6 to 12 months. So if you are monitoring, your debtors, your customers, and you receive an email alert that a default has been registered, it's something that I think in times gone by, people have not put a huge amount of emphasis and importance on defaults. Obviously, if it's we're talking tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, that's a different story. But even at the thousands of dollar mark, it's something that you should be taking into consideration and keeping an extra close eye on that particular debtor, because the data that we're seeing is showing that even those smaller ones are turning into court actions down the track, and ultimately, that's a pathway to administration. So on the payment default side, we're seeing I've written steady here, but as you can see, we've seen, quite a increase in both the number of defaults being registered as well as the value of the default. So in this case, this graph I've used here is looking at the value of these defaults. If we looked at the number of defaults, it's actually more of an increasing line. There hasn't been that drop off from where we see the peak in Q3 2016. So on the back of these rising payment defaults, as I mentioned, we're seeing a sharp increase in the number of court actions that have been registered in the last 6 months, particularly in Victoria and New South Wales, where the majority of court actions take place around Australia. So as you can see there, again, keeping in mind it's a quarterly year-on-year comparison, steep increases there for both New South Wales and Victoria in both Q4 of last year and Q1 of this year. What we've done for this risk review this time round, we've actually included not only the number of court actions that are taking place, but also the dollar value. So you can see the dollar value has increased a lot more, suggesting that there's been quite an increase in the size of the actual court cases that are taking place. So something to be very much aware of, because the bigger the court case, the more likely that particular entity, if a judgment is handed down, will ultimately be wound up and potentially put into administration within a couple of months. So really obviously taking notice of not just an increase in the number of court actions, but also that there has been a sizable increase in the value of those actions that are taking place. Around the rest of Australia, we've seen some decreases in Queensland, so potentially there's a little bit of reprieve for them after a tough, 12 to 18, 24 months. In South Australia and WA, however, there's been continued increases, so 64% and 32%. Respectively, in terms of the number of court actions that are taking place in South Australia and South Australia and WA. Looking at payment trends, so just to give you a bit of background on how we put together these payment trends, we're capturing payment data from a number of our customers, so both corporates and small businesses. Our corporates typically will submit an age trial balance on a monthly basis. All that information is confidentially aggregated, so we can see that, if you've got debtor ABC Proprietary Limited, they might have 10 creditors who are supplying trade payment information on them. We put that together to provide what we call the average days outstanding that particular entity pays. Obviously, we can do that on a bulk level as well, looking at SMEs and corporates, and obviously the payment relationships between those two types of the market. So we see obviously SME to SME payment continues to slowly increase, but we know that they're always the trickiest there. SMEs to corporate is obviously lower there, and the reason for that is corporates, who many of you on this webinar today can attest that they've got a dedicated accounts receivable team, credit managers, collectors, and then legal as well if they need to get to that point. They're a little bit more sophisticated in their collection techniques. It's a lot more proactive than reactive, and as a result of that, we see that corporates can obviously collect from SMEs much better than any of the other sort of combinations that we see there. The other thing to keep in mind is corporates tend to be a critical supplier. So for a small business, they need to keep those critical suppliers happy. Otherwise, more often than not, they won't be able to be in business very long without, the banks or their landlords, for instance, telcos, utilities, that sort of thing. Corporate to corporate, well, there's no sort of surprises there. There's been a big sort of discussion going around at the moment, led by the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, Kate Carnell, I believe her name is, has had a submission to government around putting more pressure on corporates, or potentially even legislating that they pay within certain timeframes. How that will go is yet to be seen, but we know that corporates, while they do string people out, they're fairly consistent in when they pay. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but if they've said they're going to pay you at 90 days, more often than not, they're pretty much paying you on that 90-day mark. Makes it very difficult from a cash flow perspective, but from a budgeting perspective, at least you know when that money is coming in, so to speak. And then corporate to SME, this is obviously the big discussion point here. So I think we will see a lot more in the media. They've been fairly quick to pick up discussion points around this Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman submission. Jumping on to the next one, what we see here is unincorporated entities. So this is a segment of the market that we really think is overlooked. More often than not, reports, reviews, the media will pick up on ASIC statistics around companies going into administration, ATO wind-ups, things to do with proprietary limited companies. Now that's obviously really important information, but equally important is how unincorporated entities are traveling. Now, an unincorporated entity is typically a sole trader, trust, or partnership. The majority of these are small businesses. Probably I've got SME there, but more likely they're micro to small businesses. It can be anyone, operating, at markets and whatnot, smaller businesses, smaller retail businesses, that sort of thing. So it's really important that we have a good grasp on how they're faring in the market, and the statistics that you can see here, and these are being taken direct from the Australian Business Register, we can see that there's been a significant increase in the number of failures of unincorporated entities. And when we designated a failure, we're saying that the status has changed from active to cancelled. It's pretty black and white. And at a business level, when we're talking about an ABN, an entity with an ABN, a sole trader, a trust, or a partnership, there's no winding up or administration process. They can be active one day and cancelled the next. So again, keeping in mind that these guys make up a huge percentage of the market and potentially your customer base, it's definitely something that you want to be aware of, and you want to be monitoring everyone, not just those big top 10 debtors that you might have out there. You want to be keeping an eye on the majority of your debtors, and typically they're made up of these smaller entities and these unincorporated entity types. So I want to run a quick poll here. Do you or would you find value in the CreditorWatch Small Business Risk Review? So give me a second and I'll just bring this up. So 3 fairly simple questions there: yes, no, and if you've never received it before, you haven't had a chance to look at it, obviously tick that one there. I'll give you about 10 seconds to fill this out. Majority of you have already got to it, which is great. As I said, we've got a survey coming up. We like to speak to our customers and our database just to see how you're feeling about everything out there, whether it's around risk or appetite to grow your business, what size business you are, things like that. We're regularly polling our own customers, capturing this information in webinars, and also for our customer base, you'll often see little pop-ups where we might ask a couple of questions. So I do thank you for contributing that information. It just helps us build the product, and also make sure we know we're doing the right thing, and what are we potentially doing wrong, and what can we improve. So that's really good to know that, one, the vast majority of you who are looking at it do find value in it. And hopefully those that have never received it before, haven't had a chance to look at it in the past, will take a little bit more notice of it now that you've joined us in this webinar, to get a better understanding of what it is that we actually provide in that small business risk review. So that really takes us to the end of the webinar today. A fairly quick one, nice and concise. As I said, we will be sending out a copy of these presentation slides, as well as a recording, so you'll be able to go through it at a later date if you want. We'll also include that link to the Small Business Risk Review, which no doubt you'll want to have a little closer look through, majority of which I've touched on everything that we've got in there, but it's always nice to sort of keep at hand. For those of you who obviously aren't customers of CreditorWatch, or who have never received that Small Business Risk Review, by joining this webinar, you're now on our database. So going forward, you will be sent that particular Small Business Risk Review. So there's no need to sort of sign up to it. Keep an eye out at the end of next quarter for that. If you're interested in trialing CreditorWatch, just click on that link there. We can get a trial up and running for you, take you through, how the credit reports work, the monitoring and alerts, get you set up with the alerts so you can see what that looks like. In terms of upcoming webinars, we've got one, I believe, in 2 weeks, a couple of weeks at least, which is around assessing your customers' creditworthiness. So we're going to look at CreditorWatch credit reports, credit scores, payment predictors, what they all mean, when you should run them, and for what types of customers, that sort of thing. So really helpful for any of our current customers to get a better idea or a refresh of how to use our credit reports, but also for non-customers out there who are interested in what is it that CreditorWatch provides in their credit reports. We'll do a fairly comprehensive review of what is available. Now, if you've got any other questions about CreditorWatch or our products, please just get in contact with us there. You'll see admin@creditorwatch.com.au, or give us a call. So far, no questions that haven't been answered by. We did have a couple of people standing by to answer some questions, so that's good. So no questions that I need to go through. So what I might do is I'll leave this open for another couple of minutes. Feel free to click on the links or get in contact with us if you do have any questions. But from me, thank you very much for joining and listening in. I really appreciate it, and I hope you obviously got something out of it as well. Speak to you soon.